Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Jennifer Gunn, and I'm the director of the Institute for Advanced Study. This is our IAS Thursdays series, a weekly series that brings ideas, conversations, and viewpoints from a wide range of scholars to the heart of the university and is designed for scholars from all walks of life. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that wherever you are joining us from today, we are all located on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of Indigenous people. The University of Minnesota is located on Dakota land ceded in the treaties of 1837 and 1851. And the Institute for Advanced Study acknowledges that this place has a complex and layered history. A land acknowledgement is one of the ways in which we work to educate the campus and community about this land and our relationships with it and with each other. The IAS is committed to ongoing efforts to recognize, support, and advocate for American Indian nations and peoples. So thank you so much for coming today. This is the beginning of the semester, so we have an unusually large number of announcements, and I thank you for bearing with me on that. The first is that we have another event tomorrow morning, and that is a symposium workshop called Thinking Spatially, Mapping Civic and Community Engagement. And I hope you'll join us for that. Next week, same time, same place on Zoom, so to speak, we have Telling Stories Differently, a public scholarship as creative exchange. And that will be a panel of young scholars who are doing really interesting work. And I hope you'll register for that too. Finally, the faculty, we are in the season for residential fellowship applications at the IAS. Faculty fellowships will be due Monday, November 8th, and interdisciplinary doctoral fellowships for graduate students will be due Monday, October 18th. There is an information session among 5 of the centers that sponsor IDF fellows on Wednesday, September 29th from 12 to 1. All of this information is available to you on the IAS website, and registration links are available there as well. If you would like to be on the IAS newsletter, just send an email to ias@umn.edu. Okay, we have all become used to the Zoom world, and before we get much further into the program, I want to offer a few technical instructions for our audience. We do have live transcription available today. To enable that option, click on the live transcript button on the bottom of your screen, the Zoom menu bar, and if you're on a mobile device, it's in the top right menu corner, and then select Show Subtitles. We'll have time for audience questions at the end of the event. If you have questions for our speakers at any time during today's presentation, you can enter them through Zoom's Q&A feature, which is also located on the Zoom menu bar. And to introduce yourselves, share resources, or anything else during the event, we recommend using the chat feature also found in the Zoom menu bar. So let me just say, question for speaker, use the Q&A thing. Anything else, use the chat feature. Be sure to select all panelists and attendees when you send your message. And now, finally, we'll get to what you really came for, which is today's program. Today's conversation will focus on higher education prison partnerships and institutional transformation. The College and Prisons Project is simultaneously a new endeavor and one with significant historical precedence in the state of Minnesota. It is a key initiative of Governor Tim Walz and Gwen Walz, both educators. And so it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest, Kate Marshall. Kate Marshall is Associate Professor of English at the University of Notre Dame, where she specializes in 20th and 21st century American literature, media and technology, and communication systems. She is also faculty and a member of the steering committee for the Moreau College Initiative, an academic degree granting collaboration between Holy Cross College and the University of Notre Dame in partnership with the Indiana Department of Correction. College courses are taught in correctional facilities by Holy Cross and Notre Dame faculty. In addition to this work, Marshall is on the faculty of the Breadloaf School of English, co-edits the Post 45 book series at Stanford University Press, and serves on the steering committee of the Post 45 Collective. So thank you so much for coming today, Kate, and I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and hello to everyone here. It's such a pleasure to join you in this hybrid format. I'm both here at the university and joining you on Zoom. I've had an exciting visit here so far, and I've been inspired learning about your work and the plans for prison education here at the University of Minnesota and among the wider consortium of institutions working in the Twin Cities. As Jennifer mentioned, I'm visiting here from the University of Notre Dame, where I teach literature, media, and science studies. Throughout my scholarly career, I've been interested in concepts related to infrastructure, which often leads me to think about both institutions and their materialities. Programs, including the Pell Grant and others, gave me access to the high quality public education that's so central to my work and my relation to the community now. I see educational inequality as social, ethical, and infrastructural issue, and my work in prison education in my university and across our region constitutes the most important work I do as a faculty member and humanist in ways that reach far beyond the programs themselves. So today I'll put this in context by introducing some of the work that we've been doing at the Westville Correctional Facility in partnership with several organizations, a partnership that we call the Moreau College Initiative. I'm joining you not as a scholar of prison education, of inequality, or of the politics and effects of mass incarceration in the United States, although these are all things that I care about. Rather, I'm joining you as a faculty member of an institution of higher education in the 21st century. As a faculty member who began teaching in my institution's fledgling program the year it was founded, and who has worked in its administration alongside many dedicated faculty colleagues since. I'm hoping to talk about how prison education can be transformative for the institutions, faculty, and students who participate in its project, and what that can teach us about higher education, and especially the non-vocational intellectual work of colleges in our contemporary culture. And I'll do most of this using our program as an example. Before I go any further, I'd like to start my story about our work at Westville at the end, or near the end, which is the admissions cycle that we ran this past summer. As with so many things, we were returning to admissions with a lot of hope for the future and trepidation about what we'd lost over the course of the pandemic. With the total lockdown of state facilities under COVID, we had been unable to run our annual admissions the previous summer in 2020, losing momentum on our statewide recruiting process and in our building efforts to fill a dorm in the facility, which had been a long-term goal of the program's efforts to build discrete spaces for the college within the Westville Correctional Facility. We had lost enrollments and crucial space, but had found creative ways to continue offering coursework during the lockdown, even if less of it, and had been able to get back into our classrooms after the spring vaccinations changed life in the facility significantly. We'd had a good round of admissions essays, although continued restrictions meant that we weren't permitted to recruit at multiple facilities this year, which was a disappointment. Our recruitment interview day was my first day back in Westville since our 2019 graduation ceremony. And the Midwest was in one of its proliferating deadly heat waves. Faculty from our faculty steering committee do all of the interviewing. And on that hot day in July, I was paired with the newest member of the committee who had just finished 2 terms as chair of one of our college's largest departments and was joining the interview process for the first time. The faculty talked about our goals for the interviews, which we had learned from our early partnership and mentoring with the Barred Prison Initiative, and specifically now Minnesota's own Daniel Karpowitz, which were that the interview is designed to meet a mind in the room. We speak with each of the men about their essays, which are written in a timed format in response to prompts from literature, philosophy, or political theory, and we try to meet them as thinkers, to see what interests them, or to see how they challenge and change their minds. We also told our new colleague that he'd be seated indoors, and with any luck, with some air conditioning. After shakedown, we split up into interview teams and moved to different sites in the prison. And at our interview site, immediately found a power outage and several other surprises. So we improvised. We were lucky enough to find someone who could help, get a hold of 3 chairs, and took over a small authorized patch of shade. It was oppressive and it was strange. And on top of that, we were masked and bumping fists rather than shaking hands and navigating distance. But like so many of my experiences at Westville, those surrounding circumstances very quickly stopped mattering. 3 people and 3 chairs made a portal to the college, and it was something that we were able to feel and enact as we spoke with these prospective students, several of whom are now enrolled in our degree program and thriving. One of the interviews we conducted that day will stay with me for a long time. This prospective student had chosen between 3 prompts for his admissions essay and had eschewed a Robert Frost poem and an argument about whether AI could create original literature, instead to take on an excerpt of the Discourse on Voluntary Servitude, a 1577 text attributed to Etienne de Boissy by Montaigne. In his essay, he had disputed what he saw as flawed presumptions in the essay about responses to tyranny, citing his own experiences of cartel coercion in Mexico as a counterexample. We were very interested in meeting him and had a great conversation with him about the essay and a number of other interests he'd been cultivating in his reading. He was a clear fit for the program. As we were wrapping up, we asked him what had drawn him to a particular text that he had mentioned in our conversation. "Oh, that's easy," he told us. "I borrowed it from the college guys." We were running late and already knew he was in, but we asked him to go on. He explained to us that he'd been living in the dorm where the college students and with the college students, and that he and many of the other men who had happened to find himself in that dorm's extra space had started forming informal reading groups, that they'd been sharing texts and arguing with each other about them, and that this was the reason he had applied to be a student. He hadn't thought that he was capable of doing the work, let alone getting in, he told us, because he had left high school before finishing and wasn't a native English speaker. But reading those books and talking and debating with the other students alerted him to something he not only could do and do well, but might love. Each year, our admissions process reinforces for me just how important the work we do at Westville is, especially at a university that aspires to serve the public far more than it currently does. Engaged and curious minds like the student we interviewed in the oppressive rural Indiana heat, surrounded only by cornfields and cicadas, require the basic infrastructure of educational opportunity to thrive and think. That this is becoming an even rarer prospect in our current systems, rather than a more free and equitable one, is one of the great injustices of our time. Importantly, work in prison education reinforces some of the basic principles of higher education that are often lost in the financialized elite universities, both public and private, which is the primary equivalence of educational value and public good. This matters to me more than ever as I serve a student population at an elite private research university, and as a Pell Grant recipient and as a graduate of the University of California, a public land grant research university system that operates in very many ways like an elite private research university, as detailed by the work of Robert Meister and many others. I don't think that the work we do in prison education at Notre Dame works as either a panacea or even worse as an excuse for the reproduction of social, class, and racial inequality that happens in the relationship between degree production and economic position in the United States, and the role elite institutions and the broader systems of higher education play in maintaining it. However, I have seen the creation of the college program at Westville focus the attention of myself, my colleagues, and our administration on the questions of what higher education is for and who it serves in ways that are shifting our institutional culture slowly and profoundly. It is also shifting the terms by which we understand the role and the public value of the liberal arts, and in my immediate environment, the humanities, amid the exacting pressures of the vocational and the project of higher education. Now I'd like to backtrack and give you a little history of how our program developed and some of the challenges we faced, and more specifically, to talk about the ways that partnerships across several institutions made its work possible. In 2012, a small group of faculty and administrators began working with the Barred Prison Initiative to build a program. This inaugurated our first crucial set of partnerships. The initial goal was to deliver 4-credit courses for an associate's degree with the hope of building a robust program capable of supporting BA degrees for advanced students. Notre Dame does not host an associate's degree, but our very close neighbor, Holy Cross College, does. And the fundamentals of our program lie in the collaboration between the two universities that share a road, but can often operate under a much bigger divide. Our institutions are very different. Holy Cross enrolls 500 undergraduates, offers 9 undergraduate majors, and does not have a football team. After offering AA degrees since the 1960s, it began offering the BA after 2002. And as our program grew, we were able to award associate's degrees and eventually BA degrees from Holy Cross. So after a 2-course pilot in 2012, the program began its curricular offerings in 2013, which is also the first year that I taught a course. In 2013, I was a young for academia, untenured professor, still trying to understand the relationship of the work I was doing at my institution to my own ideas about public education, as well as to what I saw happening in public education, both in my home state and elsewhere. A brilliant colleague of mine, a Miltonist named Steve Fallon, sent out an email to the faculty telling us about the program he was helping to build, about the great work of BPI that was inspiring and supporting it, and about his own experience at Westville. I knew immediately that this was something I should be doing, and I wrote to Steve and told him. Like a good senior colleague, he cautioned me about taking on additional courses pre-tenure, but I think he also understood that taking part in the program could be something that would help me recontextualize the tenure process as one that is also about being part of an institution. In my case, one very different than those I'd known before. Those first semesters were exciting and hard for everyone involved. They required a lot of trust from the students, from the faculty, and from the Department of Corrections, as well as our home institutions. But the lesson we learned from BPI and our more experienced colleagues about approaching our courses no differently than on our home campuses served us well. In his book, College and Prison, Daniel Karpowitz calls this approach resisting, quote, the well-meaning but insidious bigotry of low expectations. I brought my Notre Dame course on naturalist fiction to Westville, a course dealing with theories of determinism and their aesthetic forms in its entirety, including my own imperfect pedagogies that I was engaged with on my home campus. That semester, there were facility problems, lockdowns, relationships still to work out with personnel in the facility, and a lot of unknowns for everyone who met in the classrooms. I lost one student, confronted a lot of unevenness in writing instruction needs, and saw another student deliver a presentation on narrative irony and native son that remains one of the best student presentations I've ever seen in the decade I've spent teaching college in Indiana. Our program is now approaching 10 years old and has grown into a robust college within the prison with an academic and extracurricular culture. This growth required a lot of support from the Indiana Department of Corrections, which has been consistent throughout our decade, and our program at Westville has continued to grow under 3 different wardens. In the 2019-2020 year, our last before pandemic restrictions, we offered a total of 35 credit-bearing courses to 70 students. The students in the program live in a housing unit that we had hoped to fill by last year, and we were on target to meet that goal. At capacity as a college dormitory, it would house almost 100 students. But that's a goal that we continue to strive for. And as I mentioned about our admissions process, there have been some positive encounters in the overlap between our students and other residents in the dorm during these more isolated pandemic years. We now expect to fill the dormitory with that 100-strong student body by 2023. By last May, we had conferred 70 associate's degrees and 12 bachelor's degrees. And under normal conditions, the program recruits from 4 Indiana prisons, all currently in the northern region of the state. And our admissions process attracts between 80 to 150 applicants a year, resulting in an average acceptance rate of 20%. So our average yield is 20 associate's degrees and 5 bachelor's degrees a year. And I assure you, graduation is always something to behold. And our annual operating budget hovers around $500,000. 3/4 of that budget currently comes from Pell and the Department of Corrections funds, another 20% from philanthropy, and then 5% from contributions from the university. Sustainability and funding is something that we talk about all the time in our faculty committee. We started with support from BPI, which helped us move to a self-funded model. And we also are always navigating the financial responsibilities and administrative costs associated with our two, again, very different institutions. Our work with Second Chance Pell has been crucial and has given us a great path forward with the full reinstatement of funding to incarcerated students nationwide. And the program has received grants from organizations including our Sunday Visitor, Indiana Humanities, the Folk Family Foundation, and the Singer Family Foundation. We've been working on building endowment funds and are gaining additional administrative support for those efforts, all with the goal of sustainable and diverse funding sources to ensure our long-term financial stability. I'm almost done with numbers. At this point, more than 75 Notre Dame faculty members and 18 Holy Cross faculty have taught courses at Westville, and the administration is split between our institutions. Notre Dame's Office of Public Affairs facilitates our leadership structure, and we now have a representative from the Provost's office working with our faculty steering committee. And Holy Cross College provides campus office space as well as additional academic and administrative oversight. The program is fully accredited as an additional location for Holy Cross College, and credits earned are transferable. These are degrees that align with the academic requirements for traditional students on the main campus of Holy Cross College. The curriculum offers serious collegiate coursework within the context of the liberal arts and college culture, and the AA is an Associate of Arts, and the BA is a degree in liberal studies. Students doing the BA choose currently between 4 concentrations: humanities, social science, business and applied science, and students choose their concentrations during the admissions process after they complete their AA degree with us. The college also offers enrolled students the 4 interdisciplinary studies courses that Holy Cross College core curriculum requires of all of its students, including the senior capstone. Extracurricular opportunities currently taken up by students include drama, art, debate, and gardening. And there's a student-led podcast initiative in development. It may come as no surprise to you to learn too that just before the pandemic shutdown in February of 2020, the debate team at Westville beat the Notre Dame debate team in competition. Now, I'm mentioning all of these details largely because of my awareness of the exciting years here of program building and collaboration, and in case they may provide some grounds for our conversations to follow this talk. But it's also to highlight that this is a good story, but one that unfolded very slowly over time and with a lot of growing room. When I talk with the colleagues who began the program, we are often excited about the contrast between when we started, where we started, and where we've come. We think about how different it is to inhabit this institution in an established program rather than a fledgling one, both in terms of the student culture that's developed, but also in our expertise as faculty of navigating institutional spaces that are now far more collaborative than wary or hostile. This isn't to say that getting through shakedown, where you're subject to the same scrutiny and rigidity as any outside visitor, is no longer a wildly different experience depending on the day. But our program has changed status from an obtuse seeming external and conceivably hostile interloper to part of the institution's identity. Some, not all, but some of the prison staff draw on the region's football obsession and like calling the college Notre Dame and like being affiliated with it. Westville is a difficult place. It was built in 1945 as a carceral hospital for both a broader population of the mentally ill in the state and those dubbed by the state as criminally insane. In 1977, it endured an awkward conversion to a prison facility, and it currently houses 3,200 men at all 3 security levels. As with many similar college programs across the country, ours has become a draw. Although the 3 additional facilities from which we draw our applicant pool are often thought in the community to be better facilities, and they certainly don't have the architectural history that Westville does, students transfer in order to participate in the college initiative. This is all terrific for the program and exciting to see. But when my colleagues and I talk about the college and where we want it to go, we also recognize areas that are still in development. Central to this conversation is the cultivation of that college space, the room for self-serious intellectuals to thrive that extends far beyond the classroom, but also charges every moment in it. We're on our way there, but are still working for it, and are also excited about what the students have not only maintained, but grown during the pandemic disruptions. For faculty at my institution in this partnership, Notre Dame, this is a question we ask about our culture on our home campus all the time. We think about how to cultivate an undergraduate intellectual culture amidst so much institutional noise, the very real noise of football or the other kinds of noise you encounter with a powerful business school, and the cultural and parental demands of earning potential clamoring for attention in discussions of academic offerings, majors, and career paths. We are constantly being asked to assign forms of value to academic enterprise, largely as a result not only of university financing, but also of the vast and terrifying trends of inequality dominating our economic and social systems. We are constantly asking ourselves in the humanities how we fit into this institutional culture, and in the liberal arts more broadly, how the work of the university is a part of the culture it both critiques and aspires to produce. Before I move to the larger public case for these projects and how making that case is central to the institutional transformations that result from working in higher education prison partnerships, I'd like to outline some of how we are thinking about the future of the program and what's behind those aspirations. Beyond the immediate goals I mentioned earlier, of achieving the full population of our Westville dorm and making the program an available draw throughout the region, we're working to expand in other ways. Internally, we're developing more curricular offerings and career support for our students when they exit the program. We're also working on a more ambitious project to build a regional consortium in Indiana to share resources and create a collaborative network for prison education in the state. We are often, and for plenty of good reasons, asked about what happens to our students after they complete the program. Traditionally, these questions revolve around employment and recidivism, although from the beginning, we've been interested in factors that also go beyond those 2 points, especially when making the public case for the work. These questions are truly fascinating, complicated, and exciting when posed in relationship to the liberal studies degrees that we offer and remain steadfastly committed to. We also look at ways to integrate our students' interests with our degree offerings and local faculty opportunities. One such program we're developing arose in part out of interest on the part of students and faculty in the deeply unequal health outcomes of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're now working with BPI to create a new public health concentration for undergraduates while building master's level academic opportunities with higher education collaborators within the consortium of colleges that we are working to build across Indiana. These efforts are in their early stages, but arose out of a collective interest in the need for trained public health experts who can communicate in their communities and enhance health outcomes. Our students and faculty see this new pathway as one way that their work could help address disparities in low-income and marginalized communities, which have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic, and to enhance public health in the future. In addition to building targeted programs out of student goals and institutional resources, we focused a lot of our efforts on building meaningful pathways for career development as students transition out of our program. One goal of our liberal arts education at our home campuses is the development and support of engaged and informed citizens equipped for participation and dissent in civic life. And this is equally true on the Westville campus, where we are committed to helping facilitate the transitions of our returning citizens off into their home communities. To build on the experience of the college inside the facility, we've hired additional staff to help facilitate such outcomes. We currently have an assistant director of alumni relations and career development doing outstanding work in the facility, and we're raising funds to create a full-time director position as well as an associate director to serve the broader Indianapolis region. And if you aren't a frequent traveler to Northern Indiana, though I'd love to know if you are, Indianapolis is about 3.5 hours south of our location near Lake Michigan. So this expanded plan has goals including 1, maintaining contact with all of our alumni and connecting them with resources for post-reentry success in several of Indiana's large counties, including within this remit, connecting students with opportunities to further their academic progress or continue academic training. 2, working with the Shaw Center at Notre Dame to broaden the terms by which post-release success is measured. 3, building an alumni advisory board to develop a broader network of support for our students as they graduate. And 4, broadening our relationships with foundations, governments, businesses, and other organizations who are willing to support and or employ our alumni in the Indiana counties that receive the most returning citizens. Some of our efforts have been helped by our faculty and communities in surprising ways. After teaching students at Westville, Patrick Regan, an internationally renowned professor of political science and peace studies at Notre Dame, who had been thinking about developing a second career in environmental technology, left his position at the university to found a solar firm in the city of South Bend with an exclusive mandate to hire people returning to work after serving felony sentences. He described his motivation for making the changes twofold: that he wanted to address climate change, which had been a major factor in his academic research, and that he wanted to provide good opportunities for people who had been incarcerated, like his students at the Westville Correctional Facility. His company, Crossroads Solar, produces solar panels for businesses, homes, and our local RV industry, and was set up with the help of local engineering students. And Regan partners with the Notre Dame Career Services Officer. Its focus is on regional development and renewal rather than large scale and low cost production. And it pays entry-level employees 2.5 times the local minimum wage. Regan claims that that of the two goals of this project, providing clean energy and also focusing on well-paying jobs to men and women returning from prison, the latter, especially because of his work at Westville, is the most significant. Normally, this isn't the kind of thing you want to mention to your administration, that professors are quitting because they've been inspired. But in Regan's case, the investment in the region and the connection to our program is one that we share happily. The other key area for growth in the future for our program that I've mentioned briefly is the construction of a statewide consortium of institutions and programs working on college and prison initiatives. This will be a crucial way for our program to work with others to create a larger regional network with the goal of serving more of our state's population. We all have our regional specificities. And in Indiana, according to a recent report by the ACLU, our statewide picture has been changing. While the national state imprisonment rate dropped 8% between 2000 and 2016, according to the report, Indiana's imprisonment rate grew 18%. In Indiana, I also quote here, Black people accounted for 34% of the prison population and only 9% of the state's adult population in 2017. So prison admissions are rapidly increasing in rural counties. Rural Dearborn County in Indiana has one of the highest incarceration rates in the country, and Indiana has also seen huge changes to its female prison population, one which our program has not been able to serve with its more regional focus. The number of women in Indiana's prisons has increased 19-fold from 121 in 1978 to 2,414 in 2017. All of these populations were served by the state's continuation of higher education funding after the 1994 crime bill cut Pell funding, but all of that funding was cut in 2011, which destroyed what had been a robust college infrastructure statewide that several institutions, including ours, have had to work to rebuild. Part of our consortium building involves increasing our support of the Women's College Partnership, a collaboration now in its 3rd year with BPI and Marian University near Indianapolis. And I have an early flight to Indianapolis tomorrow for a meeting of all 3 of our institutions with both administrators and faculty like me who have worked on the steering committee to work together on common goals for that program's work in the Indiana Women's Prison. Being able to take the work that we've been doing in our immediate region and make it part of a statewide effort, and especially to expand to additional underserved populations and potential students, is very exciting for me personally, and also significant for our local institutional cultures, because it raises the level at which these issues are discussed more broadly on campus. Founding and since then sustaining a robust college program in our local correctional facility has ignited several institutional conversations, some of which are immediately visible and others of which have been evolving with our program over our near decade in operation. These transformations happen at the individual and the program level, and they happen all the time. One of my favorite things to participate in as a member of our faculty steering committee after admissions and teaching is faculty recruitment. We do a lot of recruiting and conversation. It's no accident, I think, that many of our university's most exciting researchers are also enthusiastic faculty teaching at the Westville campus. These are excellent spokespeople for both the experience and the intellectual culture of the program. We also hold regular recruiting sessions, information sessions for faculty who want to know what it's like to teach at Westville. In these events, we talk about our experiences, about the shared pedagogies between our home campus and the Westville campus, and our opportunities for collegiality with our partner college in Holy Cross College, and about how the work makes us better thinkers and teachers when we are back at Notre Dame. Something I always like to see over several iterations of these events is who comes back, or how we can begin a conversation with a colleague that might not mean they're teaching the next semester, but that they integrate the idea of that teaching into their overall sense of their work at the university, which sometimes means that their first class is a few years later. Reaching a broad array of faculty is a crucial part of this process. and yields a curriculum that is often a real showcase of the most exciting and sought after classes on the main campus. For a very brief example of that range, our students' recent courses have included a class on the contemporary American political divide, taught by the chair of our political science department, a gender studies course taught by the extraordinary University of Minnesota alum Pam Butler, in which they shared the same equity and access pedagogies that they've developed for their Notre Dame students with great success, and a series of physics courses taught by Laura Phillips, who built a physics lab in the Westville campus and was named a fellow of the National Society of Black Physicists in 2020, partly in recognition of that work. Then as a follow-up note for anyone here that gets more involved in faculty recruiting, I'd just say don't hold back, because you can't know who will be an extraordinary part of your faculty in a facility unless you give them the chance to consider it. Some shifts that we've also seen we can't directly attribute to the growth of the program, but are important complements. On a campus that seemed to many of us to be behind the rest of the country in its intellectual investment in different disciplinary conversations around incarceration, we've also seen a lot of growth. This year, our sociology department welcomed Anna Haskins, a scholar of the intersection of incarceration, education, and the family. And our Institute for Advanced Study this year has developed its focus on incarceration by inviting both Mary Frances Phillips, a scholar of women's prison organizing, and the acclaimed poet and lawyer Reginald Dwayne Betts, author of Felon Poems and A Question of Freedom, as fellows. When we talk about building our program, one of the things that we notice is how different and sometimes unexpected units of the campus want to gather and learn from each other, especially around topics of education and inequality. And as I mentioned at the beginning of these talks, these are issues that have been important for me as I tried to find a home on a campus occupying such a principal place in the elite withdrawal of higher education from public life. Although it's not the primary goal of prison partnerships in higher education, I think it's very important to think about the ways in which working on such projects can shape, transform, or challenge the home institutions that embark on the work. This is for many reasons. First, as I've mentioned and we'll discuss in more detail, it can be central in how an institution and its faculty understand their public mission. And this is true for both private and land-grant institutions alike. These are projects that require constant reflection, and when you're working on them, you are always making the case for their funding, staffing, and relationship to the various institutions involved in their partnership. Although this is hard work, it has real benefits, especially as such case-making becomes part of larger conversations about the nature of our institutions and who they serve. As I approach the conclusion, I'll now talk about how the public case for college and prison has been a part of our institutional conversation, and what it can tell us about how we in higher education have to constantly make the case for the public as well within our institutions, something that can teach us in turn about what the work of the university is and can be in the 21st century. I spoke about faculty recruiting as one of the primary but subtle ways in which our work changes the campus conversation around access to education and the mission of the university, because it's very simply the first step in asking people to ask that question. But it's something we are always asking of the university administration as well. We not only ask for support and the right to exist, but are also constantly not just asking, but insisting that the university assess its ways of serving the public good, and the region in which it sits. We are in an exciting regional moment in the university's intellectual culture. And here I'm talking about both the institution I know best and of universities and colleges more broadly, because movements in sustainability studies and social and environmental justice have brought a renewed emphasis on regional pedagogies, local material, for example, and in one of my own key areas of focus as a scholar, infrastructural studies, local material systems interact with networks of power, of meaning making and culture in ways that actively and insistently resist decontextualization. On my campus, there had been a tendency to avoid thinking about or interacting with the local community, environment, or deep histories of injustice and violence in the region. What's evident to everyone who teaches in the multi-campus way that I see my work in the program is inviting us to do is that our work is simply better when we open its context, that our pedagogy improves when it must meet challenges like access to technology or less conformity of opinion or background, and that our significant but abstract scholarly capacity to think otherwise, the elusive and significant goal of so many academics, can encounter new horizons of possibility when it also encounters a rich new intellectual environment such as that our students at Westville create. In a recent fundraising meeting with a prospective donor for our program, the potential donor asked us how we felt when we were on our way to or arriving at the facility. I didn't have a grand story for this person about my purity of intention or uncomplicated joy at arrival, or even of an affective relationship to the institution I approach when I go. Instead, the honest answer was a banal one. In a way that's not dissimilar to course preparation at my home campus, I'm always stretched a little thin. When I drive out to Westville, I'm thinking about everything I haven't finished on that week's agenda. And I often wonder, and it's a 45-minute drive, which both adds to this and gives me a lot of time to think, I wonder if I've just taken on too much. Plus, I have to go through shakedown and hope that class can run smoothly. So put more simply, I'm usually a little harried and possibly even annoyed. And then I teach, which is what I was also able to tell this interested party. And what I was also able to tell this interested party was that I have never left with the same stress or conflict about making the journey and time that I brought in. That every single drive home has been a more focused and thoughtful experience, often a little chagrined about my earlier thoughts. And I've done this enough times to know that I know to bring a notebook so that I can stop and write and think in the time that follows. The main reason I want my colleagues to participate in our initiative and teach at Westville is so that the largest part of the university as possible is engaged in teaching beyond its closed population and learning to think about the role of the university beyond that restrictive sense. But I also want my colleagues to do it for that more personal experience. Academic life in the 21st century can be extraordinarily privileged, but that's not the same as easy. And a very clear benefit to an individual of extending their campus in such a way is that it can help clarify and strengthen the sense of value in the work of higher education in a time of crisis. Or put more simply again, I think it's a better way to be an educator today. Another question our faculty group was asked by the potential funder of our program was one that college and prison programs and almost all groups working in the liberal arts are familiar with, which is why should these students study the liberal arts instead of something more vocational? Isn't it even more crucial for these students to have their education lead directly to employment? Now, the answer to this question is too complex and profound for me to attempt here, but I would argue that it's inextricable from the questions that institutions of higher education everywhere are being asked, whether it's from tuition-paying parents, legislators, and taxpayers, or a broader public skepticism of university thought as either elite, politicized, or dangerous. What I'd like to highlight here is that having to answer that question when building a prison campus that is tied to your university or college requires you to think about those other answers too. In our program, we approach this in several ways. This involves speaking to a broader institutional history. So I am a non-religious person teaching in a religious institution and have learned much from the history and practice of both the Catholic liberal arts tradition and Catholic social teaching that informs so much of its policies and curricula. And understanding that local context and also translating it for the very different student population in a way that is both effective and non-coercive has been crucial. We're often asked also for data. I have some automated responses to such questions that have been long conditioned by my life as a humanist in the age of social sciences. But this is also a conversation that our program is hoping to change at its origin. And several Notre Dame faculty and the administration, in partnership with BPI, have granted resources to move some of these conversations beyond the usual, if effective, recidivism data to look specifically at the impact of liberal arts education post-release. Working also with students at our home campuses as they complete their degrees to learn about things like academic motivation, soft skills, and civic engagement. The ultimate goal is a collaborative one, to create modes of assessment that other programs can use. In a recent article for the Chronicle of Higher Education on the problem of conceiving of and addressing the public, especially in the disciplines of the humanities, Faisal G. Mohammed cautions against what he sees as a salvationist undertone of calls for scholars to make work within these disciplines more publicly accessible, especially if such a move would further entrench inequalities within the tenure system or imperil academic freedom. His caution, however, is also to protect the kinds of public-facing work that is transformative, a list that includes what he calls the broad umbrella of the public turn, including K-12 outreach, gallery, library, and museum engagement, and happily for us, prison education. These have the potential, he says, to invigorate our mission as scholar teachers as we strive to contribute to a democratic society that cultivates the democratic arts of thinking, writing, and ethically encountering individuals unlike ourselves. He also worries that the current structure of our universities is not equipped for such a public turn, and that it will fail without real structural change. Rightly conceived, he argues, the public turn needs no star system. It is the work of many hands engaged in the common cause of teaching and learning from students of all kinds. And if it is to be truly vigorous, it must be open to the wild work that engaging matters of public concern can produce, work that is not always consistent with university branding. So I think it's important that scholars like Mohammed, who are evaluating the public turn for the university more broadly, center prison education in the range of effective ways of making sure that the universities and colleges are truly a part of the communities that house them, and that any reflection on how our work serves the commons also considers teaching in that equation. The more we raise these questions together, the better we serve the kinds of institutions that the 21st century needs. I'll conclude briefly with a return to the students of the Moreau College Initiative at Westville, whose access to education is the motivation for everything that we do. I understand that here at the University of Minnesota and partner institutions, you are developing a bachelor's degree for students at the Stillwater facility to pursue. And I'll say that the development and implementation of the BA at Westville is one of our proudest accomplishments in the partnership between Holy Cross and Notre Dame. What our students have achieved in that program has been extraordinary, and they've achieved it not because they've been rescued or needed charity, but simply because they had access to the opportunity. And as I've been arguing, this is an opportunity that needs to be vastly more available for us to hope to move the needle on equity in education. But doing this work at the level of our institutions and their communities is a start. 2 of our students completed their BA degrees during the incredibly difficult 2020-2021 academic year during extensive lockdowns. Throughout that time, several people in our program worked closely with the administration at the facility to keep students engaged and the program running. The 2 students who completed their capstone thesis, who have given permission to share and discuss their work, and they had to do so almost entirely with asynchronous advising. The Notre Dame professor of liberal studies and history and philosophy of science, Bill Sloan, for example, would read and offer feedback on Landon Harbert's 40-page thesis on renewable energy standards in Indiana, after Mr. Harbert would write by hand because of his reduced access to our computer labs under lockdown. And then Justin McDevitt, our assistant director of alumni relations and career development, would type the first drafts, and then he would type the feedback in each exchange. There were a lot of exchanges. And so I'll read to you from his first paragraph to give you a sense of what he accomplished in this project called Barricade at the Crossroads, Indiana's current failure to set a mandatory renewable energy standard. He says, realize it or not, Indiana is at the center of the environmental debate. Massive fossil fuel end use coupled with a capacity to produce energy from renewables on a large scale makes Indiana the perfect case study for environmental policy challenges occurring around the world. To illustrate that challenge, online generation from independent wind operations gave Indiana the capacity to produce, quote, more than 4 times the state's current electricity consumption in 2013. Yet, as of 2021, the state's legislature still had not targeted this clean source of energy through a mandatory renewable energy standard, RES, requiring a minimum percentage of electricity generation come developed directly from this resource. In the wake of incessant warnings to policymakers from the scientific community to urgently reform and implement policy to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, it would seem that Indiana's activity would be enough to spawn political action. To the contrary, such prompts have done little to move the needle on policy reform in Indiana. Therefore, it all begs the question, given the state's awesome clean energy potential, why is it not set a mandatory renewable energy standard? Harvard's well-researched capstone ends with a call for greater mobilization of deliberative democracy practices statewide to make the desired standards policy. He joins many of his peers at Notre Dame and Holy Cross who are bringing together broader disciplinary research questions and their local implications in creative and powerful ways. Students this year were thankfully back in the labs and meeting their advisors in more felicitous circumstances, and just like last year, are producing excellent work. On my admissions visit, I met with a student whose project on Sylvia Plath had become such an all-consuming passion that it made me nostalgic for my own days as an undergraduate. That's the kind of nostalgia that can only be produced when your sense of inhabiting a college space is utterly thorough. And so I'm beyond excited to see these moments develop for you and your students too. Thank you so much for inviting me to share with you today. I look forward to talking more and also to seeing what you build.
Thank you so much, Kate. That's really an incredible story, and really, I think, gives me a great sense of excitement about what we can be doing in Minnesota. I just want to remind people we have one question in the Q&A, and we'll get to that in just 1 second. And I want to remind people that they can enter questions in the Q&A at any time. Because I have a huge list of questions, and you all might prefer to get to ask your own instead of me monopolizing. So one question we have is, how has instructional design, such as user experience design and user interface design, been considered and or implemented in the courses offered at Westville?
Thank you, Marisol. That's a great question. And it goes to some of the ways in which we think about the role of the courses, how they fit into our relationships to the main campus, and the overall goals of the faculty teaching in the program. We have, whenever a new faculty member joins our program, we talk with them about the key pedagogical goals, about the degree program. But the first piece of advice that we give them is to teach the course that they teach on the home campus. We have specific courses that are that fit our curriculum that sometimes might be new to a faculty member that they'll design. But the primary goal of any course is first to replicate the pedagogy and the intellectual content of the home campus courses. Now, home campus courses, think about questions of design and can think about interface questions. It depends on if those are related to in-class experiences or technological experiences. During the lockdown, we followed strict rules on how our courses could be delivered, and so we had a pretty elaborate process of DVD lectures, et cetera, that were presented to our students, and then we had the typed theses and several interlocutors participating in that, hoping to replicate as close as possible the in-person experience. And so the in-person experience is central to our program design and pedagogy, and I think is unlikely to change dramatically in the future.
Thanks, Kate. Okay, we have another question. How have you found ways, or have you found ways to allow students at Westville and students at Notre Dame and Holy Cross to engage with each other? Potentially things like remotely connecting classes at Westville and Notre Dame, Holy Cross, volunteer opportunities for students at Notre Dame and Holy Cross to support Westville students, joint artistic endeavors like literary journals and publications, things like that.
Thanks, Allison. That's also a terrific question. It's one that we talk about a lot, and it's part of how we're thinking about our program's relationship to the university right now. And so we have, there are already a few ways in which our students interact. We do have some shared literary publications. We've had creative writing classes taught in the facility in recent years, and so there's been some sharing of work between students there. We have a lot of graduate students who go out to the facility to work with Westville students as well. But with our undergraduates, we also had an art show in South Bend that resulted from a class that was taught by one of our most outstanding painting faculty, Maria Tomasula. And then we've had some small groups of students that have been able to visit the campus. There are other ways in which Notre Dame undergraduates are involved at the facility that aren't directly part of our program. That has to do with a Shakespeare program that is run also in the facility from Notre Dame. And so it's something that we really want to build. It's something that a lot of faculty in our institution talk about, the ways in which we bring students into the conversation. We talk about the work that they're doing. When I'm teaching students, I always talk to students about it, and it's one of the ways in which I connect with them. It's one of the ways I'm a faculty member from a very different background from a lot of them, and this is something that our students who are very socially committed are interested in, and so it's a way in which I can talk to them about the work of the university. But I think that it's an important part of how the university is seeing our work as being integral to it, and so we've been trying to work on creative ways to get our students more involved in a shared project and to understand themselves as colleagues. And so the other thing I mentioned is we had the debate teams meet and have the Westville debate team triumph, which was also a very good moment of institutional collaboration. But that's the type of thing that we'd like to build more of.
Great, thank you. There's been a rising enthusiasm, energy, and organizing around prison abolition over the last year. I'm curious about what your thoughts on the intersections between college and prisons and the abolition movement. What are your thoughts on this, and how does it show up in your coalition building, program planning, and personal experience?
Thank you. I mean, that's a great and very complex question. It's something that I think about a lot when I'm doing this work is how does this work fit in with the broader cause of prison abolition? And again, there's different ways in which there's different ways in which you can think about it. Are you in some ways, participating a system that is, shown again and again to be unjust, carceral, and devastating in all of these different ways? Or does providing educational opportunity within those institutions counter the purpose of those institutions in some major way, or counter at least some of the inequality that's perpetuated by them? And so my biggest focus in doing this program is less on prison abolition than on educational opportunity. And that's not because prison abolition isn't a cause that interests me deeply, but it's because the focus of the work is in making educational opportunity available to people who in many of our cases have not had equal access to it. And so this is a way in which in which some of that work can be redressed, which is not a perfect answer to that question. I don't have the right answer to that question for myself or for the work. But I think that it's one that a lot of us doing it think about.
Thanks. I'm going to take that prerogative and say that the moderator's prerogative. And you talked about your interest in who comes back and how they integrate the teaching experience in their work. And one of the things I always feel when I teach a class is how much I learn from my students, and that our joint work together changes, brings new questions and may help change my research. And I'm curious about what your own experience of that has been, or some of your colleagues who have talked about this.
Thank you. It's something that we talk a lot about, especially when we're doing faculty recruitment, which is, part of what I was alluding to in the talk is that kind of personal transformation isn't the primary reason we would encourage someone to work in the program, but it is part of how we make the institutional case, which is a completely crucial part of the work that we're doing, making the institutional case and making that public case. And so one of the things that has been true for me is that when I teach the course at Westville, I encounter different ways of thinking about the works that I'm teaching. I encounter different ways of thinking about the issues that I'm surveying. And as we talked about in a community of practice meeting earlier today with which other people have encountered, is that you're also working with a group of students who are incredibly dedicated and energetic in the conversation, that gives you more hope for how those conversations can possibly go on your home campus with a student population that might not bring as much to that room on that day as the students you've encountered, in the facility. And also talking to both groups of students about each other has been a very dynamic part of that teaching experience. But I can think of no exception in my conversations with, dozens and dozens of colleagues, in which someone doesn't profoundly think that their pedagogy and that their approach to the material on the home campus is improved from doing that work. And so this is something that we talk about with that we talk about with administration, that we talk about with, people who might be funding the program. And this is something that we talk about with our colleagues who are thinking about what it's going to take to get out to that institution and add a course to their load, or add several courses to their load, about what it's going to do for their overall pedagogy, what it's going to do for how they can think about the project of higher education in their lives.
We have another great question from Allison, but I'm going to take a moment just to say that in the chat, Jenna Dreyer, who is heading up the University of Minnesota prison higher education program, and I can't read fast. Yeah, prison education program, Minnesota prison education program, posted her email in the chat, and I wanted to, and I know we have non-U of M people here, and I wanted to invite others of you, like Travis Sands from Metro State, and Janet Morales, who is directing this program in the Department of Corrections, to enter your email addresses in the chat as well, for people to be able to get in touch with you if they're interested. And now back to the Q&A. So with initiatives like Second Chance Pell, do you see the federal landscape becoming more supportive of college and prison programs? What kind of ongoing political advocacy would you encourage folks to engage in if we want to be supportive of these programs?
Thank you, Allison. I think that's an important question to be thinking about right now. So yes, the federal landscape is absolutely becoming more supportive of college and prison programs, and there's definitely a lot more interest nationwide in doing that kind of work. After the decades of destruction of it, there's also the potential there's a potential for abuse of that support. And I think one of the most important points of advocacy to do in relationship to college and prison is to support high quality college and prison. And that the very best education is what these students deserve. And I think that, ensuring that it can be liberal arts programs. There's a few different ways in which that can be defined, but I think that making sure that that those funds are directed to high quality, serious education for those students is a really important part of the picture to come.
Great. Given the settler colonial imperial histories of private research and land grant universities like Notre Dame and the University of Minnesota, I'm interested in the ways that these institutions are increasingly rolling out higher education and prison programs as part of their, quote, public engagement work. Could you speak to some of the ways institutions like yours engulf or enclose, quote, local materialities, and how awareness of such engulfment informs your own work, higher education and prison work?
Thanks, Travis. That's a hugely important question to think about in relationship to that public question. In the case of my university, which is very much a part of the history that you mentioned, our initial desire and even production of this program was not met with extreme institutional enthusiasm, to put it even gently. It was the work of a set of faculty and a few administrators who saw this as a way of countering some of the moves that were at least more closely tied to that, or more continuous with that institutional history. Right now, we have much more enthusiasm for the project. And I think that some of that enthusiasm can be tied to the kind of co-optation that you're describing, that public engagement can be a way of I can't think of the right I can't think of the right term, like greenwashing, that would fit this particular nexus. But from the point of view of the faculty working on the program, we are very happy that we've been able to set up the program on the terms that in some ways were more adversarial, so that we've built a program that we believe in, that then we are happy for the institution to support and try to claim some identity over, partly because part of the hope is that it will allow for more programs to be built and more serious programs to be built. But any move like that is, of course, always a compromise.
You mentioned briefly that corrections facility staff see the connection with Notre Dame and Holy Cross favorably, or at least some of them do. Could you talk a little bit more about how guards and others feel about this opportunity for the inmates? Do guards and others already have equivalent degrees themselves, or is this a point of contention?
Thank you. Well, this is often a point of contention. And I can't speak for all of the experience of faculty, and I cannot speak for all of the staff that we work with, but anecdotally, this is something that has changed somewhat over time, especially as our college presence within the facility has consolidated. And so when I first taught, in the earlier part of the program, we had a very different experience with personnel in the facility who were not accustomed to our presence in the facility, and who were often talking to us about the lack of justice in their eyes with the opportunity that we were providing. And there's a lot of ways in which the people employed in the facility that we work in have also been deprived of educational opportunity themselves. And so this is something that the atmosphere has changed partly over time, because that's a conversation that was at least more upfront and more active when we began our work in the facility, because it was new. And a lot of the people that we work with encounter us as an established program. And so I think it could be useful to keep those lines of conversation or reopen them in a way if they've become more silent.
Thank you for your integrative perspective on liberal education contextualized in community need and practice, as well as the need for further integration of liberal education with 21st century infrastructure and its transition to sustainable forms and embeddedness in deliberative democracy and civic sectors. Are you familiar with ways that regenerative agriculture has been used as a, quote, living lab site on a prison campus, especially its potential for teaching integrative liberal education courses connecting ethics, mental and physical health, and community economy or local entrepreneurship?
Thank you, Catherine. I am aware, but not in any deep sense of some of these programs, partly because one of the people working in our program who has been, I mentioned that we have a garden club, which is, it's in a extracurricular sense, but that one of the staff of our program who's been working with developing that has brought some of this work to our attention and has that as part of, as part of the goals for how he's thinking about developing this program and how it might integrate into our curriculum in the future.
Okay, thanks. So I just want to, and thank you all. Also, I want to thank Travis and Janet and Jennifer letting me put them on the spot, as just to post their contact information. That's really kind of you, and I do appreciate it. And does anybody want to have a last word or question here? Well, I want to say thanks so much to Kate for coming in person. It is a thrill to have an in-person, even virtual, even though it's virtual, an in-person IAS speaker. And I do encourage you to get in contact with the coordinators and program directors at your own institutions, or with Janet if you're looking outside of those institutions more broadly. And thanks again, Kate, for giving us such a thoughtful sense of how this work can better, can positively impact our own institutional transformation in higher education. So thanks again, everyone. We'll look to see some of you tomorrow at Thinking Spatially, and again next week in Telling Stories Differently. Thanks so much for coming.